That's right. We're on to season 3 of The Magicians. Now, I hope you have some water because this one is a long one. Episode 1. The Tales of the Seven Keys. In case you've forgotten what happened last season, Quentin killed Ember, and the gods didn't like that. So they took magic away, and now magic everywhere is gone. Except Julia still has a tiny spark. And now Julia and Quentin are trying to figure out why she still has magic in the hopes that they can get magic back for everyone. Julia's working theory is that it's a little smudge from when the Lady Underground gave her shade back. Quentin thinks that it may have to do with the whole Reynard thing. Penny is still working for the library and is going after overdue books, which leads him to getting tied up in a man's basement. Because apparently this angry patron is upset and blaming Mayakovsky and his apocalypse batteries for jinxing magic, and saying that there's one fatal flaw with those batteries, and it's the fact that magic being gone only affects magicians. Magical creatures still have magic. And we see this firsthand in the fact that Penny can still travel, which in a way that means that Penny is a creature, or at least some sort of hybrid. He ends up traveling himself back to Katie, where we are once again reminded that he is still dying. His Cancer Plus that he picked up from the library's poison room is still very much a big problem. And traveling around for the library is only speeding up his demise. In Fillory, the Fairy Queen and her fairies have arrived. The treasury is empty, and Fen, her sanity is hanging on by the log that she's treating like her child. Margot is under the Fairy Queen's thumb, even after bargaining away her eye, and is being made to do some very odd tasks. Breakables is also not doing so hot. Dean Fogg is cosplaying a drunk Stevie Wonder, and the board wants to reallocate funds and resources to finding magic instead of just teaching the theoretics, and are threatening to shut the school down. Let's just say it's not very good to be a magician in a magicless world. Quentin figures the best mode of action is finding another god. Julia is reasonably hesitant about it, but Josh just so happens to know where there might be a god. He ends up taking them to a party being thrown by the one and only Bacchus, the god of revelry and parties. And Josh immediately gets greeted, welcomed, and let in, but Julia and Quentin get denied. Bacchus is like, you guys are no fun, come back when you can vibe. Katie meets up with Harriet, her, anti-library knowledge freedom fighter friend, and tells her that she can't work for her anymore, as without magic being around, there's nothing she can do to save Penny. But Harriet's response is to scoff and to say, yeah, that's what you think. Margot tries to get the castle guards to harvest the earthworms for her, but the Fairy Queen won't accept them unless they are picked specifically by her. Raph, Abigail's handler, the sloth, lets Elliot know about a corridor that is made from a material that the fairies are allergic to. And so Elliot and Margot go there to try to plot to figure out maybe does King Idri have any information about fairies, because coincidentally, just as the fairies showed up, all information about fairies disappeared from the castle. But just as they leave the corridor, they run into the Fairy Queen, who already seems to know what they've been discussing. Back on Earth, Julia and Quentin are getting loser drunk in a stairwell, and for whatever reason, they end up doing their old 10th grade dance. After that, Bacchus finally lets them into the party. They try to talk to Bacchus about magic, and he sort of just blows them off until they tell him that oh, by the way, yeah, we're the reason that magic got turned off because they killed Ember. And for a very long pause, it almost seems like Bacchus is going to get upset until he's like, oh, I didn't know him. I don't care. And Bacchus ends up giving them a party favor and walks away. Quentin starts tripping and has a flashback about Alice leaving, while Julia ends up on a bed and then hallucinates Richard's face on another guy, and then jolts up and goes to seek out Josh. Julia and Josh end up talking about how getting high can go from being fun to PTSD very quickly, and Josh laments that life just isn't the same without magic. As a magician, you just didn't belong somewhere. You belonged everywhere. And without that, you're just sort of lost. Julia ends up revealing to Josh her magic. And Quentin has a little minor panic attack being like, hey Julia, we shouldn't go around sharing that we have magic because we don't know what the wrong person will do with that information. Back in Fillory, Elliot brings Margot into the woods and uses a series of earthen pop culture references to communicate to Margot that the reason the Fairy Queen always knows what they're up to is because the Fairy Queen has Margot's eye. Elliot's solution to this problem is to go on a drinking party in which he secretly will track down the White Lady in order to wish away fairies. Back at the party, Quentin is using 110% of his serotonin to try to get information out of Bacchus, to try to find a connection to the old gods, but Bacchus is like, yeah, we're not in contact anymore. The only guy I knew, Prometheus, who liked to help magicians, he's not around anymore. But there is one piece of information that might be helpful, and that's the fact that there might be a back door to magic. That or a brothel. Elliot is hunting for the White Lady, but instead finds the Great Cock. The Great Cock brings Elliot to a romantic campsite to hear Elliot's petition, but instead of granting his request, he decides to send Elliot on a grand quest. You know, a quest that could take an entire season, perchance. The first task is to find the book with no author in a New Jersey public library. There's just one problem with that. Elliot can't go to Earth without magic, but a talking rabbit could carry a message. Julia and Quentin receive the message from the rabbit and take on the arduous journey down to New Jersey and find a book called The Tale of the Seven Keys. You know what that means. It's time for a quest. The book has a lot of empty pages, but from what is there, it seems like the first key is in Fillory, just outside of the Fillorian borders, on a faraway island that their forebears drowned trying to get to. And in case you were wondering, no, Alice was not forgotten. She's been busy, namely giving blood to a vampire in exchange for information on the lamprey that she angered and is now hunting her down, and ends up getting an early warning system for it. She ends the episode eating bacon in a diner. Episode 2, Heroes and Morons. Long, long ago, there lived a knight whose greatest wish was to pass down his legacy to a son. But he only had a daughter. One day, a witch kidnapped the knight, and the daughter pleaded with her to let him go, but she wouldn't. However, he could be rescued. There are 7 keys. Find them, and you can free him from the castle at the ends of the world. The first key was on an island beyond her kingdom, and the destination was even more perilous than the journey. Nothing was what it seemed on the island. And that's where the book ends for now. The Earthside group, Julia, Quentin, and Josh, want to go support Elliot on the quest, but they need to figure out how to get there. They have the grandfather clock, but without magic, it won't work. Mayakovsky did have those doomsday batteries though. He claimed to have only had 4, but who actually trusts the word of the drunk Russian? And Josh just so happens to have found a video of a bear breaking things in what seems like a hedge witch bar. Elliot is getting ready for his quest, but due to Fillory's financial issues, there are limited options when it comes to seaworthy vessels. Alice adopts a kitten, and at a construction site, a creature, the lamprey, crawls inside of a worker. Josh shows the footage to Katie, and she confirms it's a hedge witch bar, and that she's familiar with it. Julia lets Katie in on her magic in the hopes that it will help convince her to help them out, as she also has a vested interest in getting magic back to save Penny. Katie goes to the hedge bar to figure out if it was Mayakovsky and if they knew where he went, if so, and learns that a couple was arguing in the bar, and then a buzzing sound filled the room, and poof, a bear. It sounds like it was Mayakovsky in Emily Greenstreet, the illicit student-teacher pairing that led to the death of Alice's brother. Quentin goes to see Emily alone due to her character, and she tells him that Mayakovsky showed up on her doorstep after he was no longer bound to break Bill's South due to magic being gone. He ended up professing his love to her, and the two of them got married. Emily claims that they met someone at the bar, a woman who tells Mayakovsky that he owes her something, but by the time that Emily got back from the bathroom, the woman and the battery were already gone, and Mayakovsky was a bear. Elliot comes to board the boat for his quest and gets warned that the muntjac is made from sentient trees. It has a personality, but it also happens to be the fastest boat they have, and just as everything is on a magical show, it is larger on the inside. Fen also wants to go on the journey, or more specifically, the Fairy Queen wants them all to go on a family trip by means of sending a trusted frail human, or Frey for short, who she claims is actually Elliot and Fen's daughter all grown up due to some fairy realm shenanigans. On the off chance that Frey actually is his daughter, Margot tells Elliot he can't strand her and offers him a piece of advice in the form of a riddle, saying, "What's the difference between a live hero and a dead moron? One dumb decision in choosing between being brave or smart." The Earth group is going around the city chasing this mysterious woman who is going around making big magic happen. Katie and Josh go after a dinosaur that made an appearance at the children's hospital, while Quentin and Julia go to an orgy at Central Park and fail at making conversation and almost get dragged in. Alice and her new cat show up at the orgy as she's also trying to track down Mayakovsky's batteries. Julia finds out that the woman that they are looking for has been looking for a building to jump off of. And Quentin, for no reason at all, just so happens to know which building she's going to be at. Fen is convinced that Frey is their daughter, but Elliot has his doubts and knows regardless she is a spy for the Fairy Queen. They land at the After Isle, and Elliot declares it for Fillory. The leader of the island, Father Poe, is busy getting the island ready for another monster attack. He has the key, but he says he can't give it away as it's the only thing keeping them alive, just as the monster shows up and everybody runs for cover. Quentin and company make it to the building and find out that the mysterious woman happens to be Professor Lipson. Quentin goes to question her about how she got the battery, but she scoffs at him, saying that the battery is hers. Mayakovsky got the battery from her. She was the mind behind the idea and the materials. Quentin tries to talk her down, saying they're trying to get magic back, but she doesn't believe him. She goes to jump, but Quentin catches her as the battery plummets to the ground, breaking. Luckily, he is able to save her. After After the rescue, the group ends up having an impromptu meeting about their next steps until Alice's cat starts hissing and then promptly explodes just as the construction worker starts chasing her down. The cat was the early alarm system. They come to the conclusion that Emily was the one who turned Mayakovsky into a bear, and that she still has the battery. This leads to everyone making a mad dash to get back to her place, where Katie gets there first and ends up punching her before taking the battery to go to try to help Penny, who is not looking so great. The monster terrorizing the villagers is a shadow bat. Frey happens to recognize it from the fairy realm, and it ends up killing one of the villagers. But at the funeral send-off, the newly reunited family all take a glimpse at the body and come to the same conclusion that the wound isn't from a shadow bat, it was from a blade. Elliot ends up going to Father Poe, taking the key and threatening to kill him unless he summons the shadow bat. It turns out that the key itself has illusion magic, and Father Poe has been using it to keep the villagers under control. They end up leaving the island with the key just as the horde of upset villagers swarm Father Poe. Frey questions Elliot on what he was actually doing on the island, as he told the Fairy Queen that the purpose of the trip was to collect taxes, but from her perspective, he was way more interested in the key. Fen ends up coming to his aid and is like, well, of course. The key is gold and magic. It's worth a lot. And then the two flex their parental powers by sending Frey to her room. After Elliot completes this first quest, Quentin sees the book update just as the construction worker containing the lamprey comes and beats him up before the lamprey makes itself at home inside of Quentin. Episode 3. The Losses of Magic. Alice gets a new cat before heading to her parents, where her mom is upset that she hasn't visited before now. Elliot is on his way back to Fillory when the boat gets boarded by pirates. And the first royal family runs and hides in the cabin, where in a panic, Elliot finds a keyhole that wasn't there before, inserts the key, and opens a portal. Quentin, who is now inhabited by the lamprey, tells Julia that his dad's getting worse and he needs to go. Julia meets up with Katie and Penny, who are working on summoning a demon to save Penny. Now that she's at her parents' house, Alice's cat is reacting strangely to her mom's friend Carol. Alice tries to get a private moment with her mom, but she refuses, so she ends up going to her dad and tells him that, hey, there's a lamprey after me, and I think it's in Carol. Margot is following the Fairy Queen's demands, having the farmers plant inedible mushrooms when she gets the news that Elliot's ship was attacked by pirates. Bad news, the next fastest ship available would take a week to reach them, so she goes to the Fairy Queen for help, saying that without Elliot, Fillory looks weak. This convinces the Fairy Queen to give her a Pegasus to get to him. Alice and her dad tie up Carol, but as we all know, the lamprey isn't in Carol, and it just makes her really mad at them. Quentin ends up showing up to the house, and Daniel, who is Alice's dad, notices something suspiciously lamprey-looking in his neck. Margot makes it out to the pirates, and while Margot is trying to negotiate with them, Tick says he can try to pickpocket her eye back from the Fairy Queen. While Julia is out getting spell components, a woman's eyes go milky white, and then she tells Julia that she's been missing the signs and that she really should be further along by now. Now that Alice knows that Quentin is the one with the lamprey, Alice wraps herself up in plastics so that the lamprey can't body snatch her. She ends up going to the garage to get the car battery because electricity is the only thing that'll kill the lamprey. When she enters the garage, she finds a prone Quentin, who is now lamprey-free, and tells her that the lamprey doesn't want to kill you. Meanwhile, the lamprey is stalking her parents from outside. Katie is busy getting the room ready for the demon summoning, and Penny cracks a joke saying that, hey, a silver lining about this whole magic being gone thing is that I'm not hearing people's thoughts anymore. Tick is able to successfully get Margot's eye back and gives it to her just before she goes to negotiate with the Pirate King, who happens to be a very attractive woman. Before negotiations can start, she wants to see that Elliot is alive and well, and gets taken down to the ship's cabin and is shown High King Elliot, who turns out to be Benedict, since Elliot and his family were able to escape through the key portal. Alice has now quarantined her family and Quentin in a plastic-wrapped room in order to keep them safe from the lamprey, but Stephanie, being Stephanie, wants to leave the room to use the bathroom because she wants to keep the mystery alive in her marriage. Alice is very against it and finally says, oh, the reason the lamprey is after me is because I brutally and callously murdered his family. No big deal. And oh, by the way, that's not the only one I did it to. It's just the only one that's been able to find her. Stephanie ends up leaving the room to go pee, and Quentin follows her as a precaution while Alice and her dad continue to research. Alice telling her dad that there wasn't anything that she wouldn't do in the pursuit of knowledge as a Niffin. After seeing Elliot alive, negotiations start between Margot and the pirates, where they state their demands. They want 3,000 gold crescents, and for their other demand, we learn a little tidbit about sentient ships. The only reason the pirates were able to track down Elliot is because their ship wants to smash the Muntjac. And since the Muntjac is under royal command, Margot is in the position to tell the vessel to submit to the pirates, but is warned that the boat may never be the same afterwards. It's almost like being forced into an unwanted sexual encounter can be very harmful. If Margot doesn't tell the boat to submit, the pirates will kill the crew. Quentin, in full plastic, goes after Stephanie, who is breaking down in the kitchen, saying that she can't keep going on like this. They just don't fit in with the non-magical world. As Quentin is comforting Stephanie, she tries to make a move on him and kiss him, but Alice and Daniel come crashing in with their car battery DIY taser and shock the crap out of her, but uh-oh, the lamprey wasn't inside Stephanie, it's in Daniel. Katie and Julia are demon summoning with the help of the battery and are able to successfully summon Azeroth, who says he can do the surgery on Penny, which is just him sticking his hand inside of Penny's sternum, which causes Penny to astral project to escape the pain. Margot goes to talk to the Muntjac and explain the situation and tries to get an opinion from her, but the ship doesn't respond. The fairy queen who was overhearing does. The lamprey didn't come here to kill Alice's family. It just wants to use them as a food source for its next generation. It tries to ask Alice what knowledge she got from killing its spawn, but she reveals that she wasn't doing it for knowledge, rather because they made pretty lights when they died. The lamprey tries to threaten her by saying that Daniel's heart isn't strong enough to handle an electric shock, but Alice does it anyways, and we get to see the pretty little lights as it dies. Margot goes back to negotiate with the pirates, only to discover that they've already been taken care of. The fairy queen was moved by her speech and also by the fact that Margot was finally stepping up as a queen. She asks Margot for Margot's eye back, but Margot chooses to crush it instead of giving it back, and the queen is very unimpressed and tells Margot that she'll have the week's sail to think about her actions. That eye is not the only method she has to keep an eye on them. Alice is giving Quentin something to kill the lamprey eggs inside of him, and they have a heart-to-heart where she tells him that whenever she looks in his eyes, she just sees the old Alice that she can't be anymore. Daniel ends up passing out on the floor, and Quentin tries to resuscitate him, but is unsuccessful. Azeroth is able to take the Cancer Plus out of Penny and tells them that it may take some time to heal, but then Penny starts turning really pale, and then Azeroth is like, oh, you guys called me way too late, just as Astral Penny watches on as his body dies. Episode 4, Be the Penny. So yeah, Penny watches on as his body dies and no one can see or hear him. Quentin comes back from his lamprey adventure to find out about Penny, and his reaction is hysterical laughter. You know, the kind that you just can't stop and is just so inappropriate, but for whatever reason your body just decided that this is how you're gonna deal with the emotions. It doesn't help that no one is crying over Penny. Not Quentin, not Julia, not Dean Fogg, and not Katie. They end up holding an impromptu remembrance for him where Quentin can't even pronounce his last name, and afterwards everyone falls into their vices. Penny travels to the Netherlands to a section of the library on astral projection to try to figure this out, but he's unable to make contact with anything, and he ends up seeing a group of people who have resorted to cannibalism. Elliot and his family show up as their portal brought them to the Netherlands, and Penny tries to warn them about the cannibals, but is unable to do anything and just ends up going back to Breakbills, where Alice and Quentin are having a conversation. Alice is talking about how she misses him and how he used to give her piggyback rides all the time, and that's when it clues in that she's not talking about Penny, she's talking about her dad. And if Alice's dad couldn't be any worse, then Quentin's couldn't be any better. Since it was magic that was causing his cancer, without it being around, he's gone into remission. Alice came back to Breakbills to get away from her mom, and Quentin tries to convince her to join the magic quest, but Alice isn't really in the right mindset, and she's like, you know what's gonna happen to your dad if you turn on magic, right? It seems in the aftermath of her dad's passing, she's had a change of heart and how she feels about magic, saying that, yeah, magic is this great, amazing thing that we used to have access to, but should we really be healing ourselves to turn something back on that caused this much trouble in the first place? Quentin is able to use a rabbit to get the news of Penny's passing to those in Fillory, and this is where Penny finally gets the first satisfying reactions to his passing. Margot is like, wow, he's really dead. You know, I always thought we'd bang someday. And Benedict is like, oh my gosh, Penny's my best friend. I'm so sad. Even though they only really spent like a day together trying to figure out where the castle went when the Lorians attacked. But you know, Penny goes back to Breakbills and witnesses Katie about to shoot herself up with something, and he's like, I can't keep watching you be self-destructive, and goes downstairs only to witness Todd stopping in front of Julia, his eyes going milky white, and telling her that she has to help. Julia runs upstairs and breaks down the door to see Katie O'Dean, and luckily she came just in time to use her magic to stabilize her. Penny is just watching all of this when a strange guy walks into the room and starts commenting on what's going on, but only Penny can see and hear him. The guy, it turns out, is the resident pervert ghost of Breakbills, Hyman Cooper. He's a fellow traveler that attended Breakbills a few decades ago that also passed while he was astral projecting. He's been stuck in the astral plane ever since. Whatever they are, they're different from ghosts, as we've seen how ghosts are, like the Plover kids who are stuck in a loop of their last moments and are still visible to the waking world. Quentin asks Julia how she knew to check on Katie, and she just brushes it off and moves on to talking about the second key. The knight's daughter found the second key in a sentient cave that kept asking riddles. For anyone familiar with the Fillory and Further books would know that this sounds an awful lot like the cave that Rupert Chatwin found. It had a mountain of treasure, but the only thing he took from it was a singular golden key. A key that he gave to his friend in the war, which means the key should be here on Earth. Elliot is on the run for his life from the cannibals, and Freya is getting increasingly upset about Elliot lying about what the key is for, but he doesn't really care as they're in a life or death situation, and it doesn't matter. He ends up taking his family inside the library to try to find another keyhole to lead to hopefully a safer place. Quentin brings Dean Fogg into the quest as they're trying to track down the soldier that Rupert gave the key down, and they found out that it was given to one Lance Morrison, who happened to attend Brakebills after the war. A librarian shows up for Penny since his soul never showed up for his service in the underworld. They have prepared a soul eater, a creature that after consuming his body will be able to bring Penny's soul to the underworld, as long as it does it within the 7-day period after his death, since the soul remains tethered to the body. But if they don't do this before the 7 days are up, Penny's soul could become lost forever. Seeing that there's a chance that Penny is not fully gone, Katie takes the chance to see if she can bring him back, especially given the fact that it could help the whole working for the library for 1 billion years thing. Alice tries to comfort Katie, saying that the underworld isn't that bad, Quentin says there's bowling, but Katie is determined to help Penny. Penny is currently being disgusted by Hyman's perving ways, but Hyman does have his uses. He's figured out a way to communicate with the living by becoming an item. He instructs Penny to become a penny, and at first he seems like a terrible teacher, and the two start arguing until Penny literally becomes a penny and even does a flip. Before Penny can go off and just try anything, Hyman cautions him, saying that the only reason they aren't dead is because they were outside of their body when it died. If Penny were to try to go back into his body now, he would just end up dying. Margot is unable to get in contact with Elliot and starts working on a plan to overtake the Fairy Queen on her own. Penny tries to become the Margolem that Todd just so happened to be storing for safekeeping in his room, but instead of being able to communicate with them, he just freaks them out, as it's a lot harder to control a semi-sentient being than a penny. In a moment of pure panic, Quentin rocks the crap out of Margolem. Julie and Quentin are able to track down the records of Lance Morrison and find out that he died on campus, but something doesn't make sense. It says he lived in the West Dorms, but to their knowledge, there is no West Dorm. It turns out it does actually exist. It was just buried because it was being haunted by a ghost, and at the time it was considered bad form to have a school with a ghost. Hyman seems overly concerned about them going there, saying that the ghost is going to try to kill them. But if Hyman is scared of the ghost, then that means something important. That the ghost can harm astral projections, which means that ghosts can see them, and it's potentially a way that Penny can communicate with them. So now, Quentin, Julia, and Penny go to the West Dorm and find a bunch of dusty covered furniture, and then a door opens up, revealing one Lance Morrison. They try to talk with him, but he's stuck in a ghost loop, as we see Rupert Chatwin come into the room, giving him the key from Fillory. This key has the ability to reveal the honest truth of things. It shows things how they are. The two kiss, and Penny comments that if this is why Hyman's scared, then he just must be a homophobic POS. Then Lance's dad shows up and starts getting really mad at him, saying, "How dare you speak out of turn about your mother's family, the McAllisters? The truth can bury them. Lance, you're speaking out of turn." Lance tries to blame the key for everything, but his dad tells him that he can't blame the key for his perversion and attacks and then kills him. He closes the door and starts to go after Julia and Quentin, but Penny steps in and attacks him and tries to get him to say his name, but he refuses, saying that Penny's name isn't a real name. Julia and Quentin are only witnessing half of this interaction and get really weirded out and leave thinking they broke it. Alice and Katie go to Harriet to tell her about the corpse eater situation, but Harriet is like, look, I don't trust these people with a book, let alone a corpse eater. The best thing that you can do for Penny is to burn his body. Sure, it would leave him in limbo forever, but is that not better than being a slave to the people that led to his death for 1 billion years? Lance's dad left with the key, but he's for sure dead by now. So they want to track down the remaining McAllisters to try to get the key. But who are the McAllisters? Well, they just so happen to be on the board of trustees for Brakebills and are also one of the oldest magical families in America. And lucky for them, Irene McAllister has been in contact with Dean Fogg for any leads on magic. Penny is interested in the key for himself, as a key that reveals things that are hidden should be able to reveal him. But today marks the 7th day since his death, and if he's unable to get in contact with Katie by tonight, it's up to her for what happens with his body. Elliot wants to use the illusion of the shadow bat to scare off the cannibals, but instead of the shadow bat, his dad appears when he uses the key and starts saying some really homophobic things. Dean Fogg, Julia, and Quentin go to Irene McAllister's house, and there is some real Beauty and the Beast stuff happening. Apparently, the house is running on enchantments that her father built up over the decades. When he was a kid, he experienced a magical blackout that inspired him to prep. Unfortunately, the enchantments won't last forever, and some of them have already started failing. Good news for them, there's just about enough to still make martinis. Irene immediately gets down to business and asks who can still do magic. Instead of Julia speaking up, Quentin starts performing his pre-magician era card tricks, claiming that the reason he was so good at sleight of hand in those days is because he was unknowingly doing translocation spells, and for whatever reason, he's still able to do them. While Quentin is putting on this farce of a show, Julia excuses herself to the bathroom and uses the translocation spell to locate the key. The sun is starting to set, and it's just about time for Katie to make a choice about what to do with Penny's body. At Irene's house, Julia finds the key, and when she picks it up, a fairy becomes visible in the background. Katie, standing in front of Penny's body, gets emotional, saying that she's been working so hard to try to save Penny that when he died, she found that she was relieved to be done. And now she just wishes that Penny could tell them what he wanted to be done. Alice goes to get the corpse eater, but Penny, who is witnessing this, is able to become a candle and burns his body. He's made the choice to be damned to an eternity of astral projecting over working for the library for 1 billion years. Julia drops the key as it is making her uncomfortable, and the fairy disappears again. Back at Brakebills, she tells Quentin about the feeling it gave her, so he avoids holding it, and they unlock Chapter 3. The next key sounds like it's back in Fillory. Dean Fogg shows up and is like, Irene was so disappointed in your showing that the board of directors have decided to put Brakebills up for sale. Julia makes a joke to Quentin, saying, well, at least both of us have now been kicked out of Brakebills. In the Netherlands, Elliot is able to find a keyhole and makes it back to Brakebills, family and all. He was able to escape due to his father distracting the cannibals long enough for them to sneak by. Since he's been unreachable, he doesn't know about anything that's been happening, and so when he picks up the truth key, he goes, oh, hi, Penny. Episode 5. A Life in the Day. In the chaos of last episode, there is one good thing. Since the physical kid's cottage has been moved around so much, there isn't a valid deed for it, which means they don't have to go looking for a new base camp, well, at least for now. Quentin and Alice have another awkward run-in for the books. She's coming to get the truth key to bring Penny on a mission. The mission? Visiting Katie in the mental hospital to show her that Penny's still alive. Katie isn't happy to see Penny. She's been getting more and more broken down just trying to save Penny. It's gotten to the point where she can't handle it anymore and she needs to prioritize herself. Because sure, Penny's not dead, but is being an astral projection really any better? She ends up dropping the key and Alice leaves with it to the tune of Penny saying, "I never should have let you talk me into this." Quentin and Elliot are working on the next part of the quest, and Todd has taken Elliot's family on an impromptu tour of New York City. The next chapter is about the knight's daughter training to become a knight. The next key is in a mosaic puzzle. The quest is to use all of the tiles to complete a mosaic that reflects the beauty of life, and the reward happens to be a mysterious prize, a key to greater magic, which just so happens to be in Fillory. Margot is working on her plan to get rid of the fairies. Namely, getting enough of the powder from that anti-fairy allergy corridor to then drug the queen's bath to take her out. The only problem with that is that it's taking forever to scratch off any substantial amount. And now, all of a sudden, the fairy queen wants Margot to form a marriage alliance with a prince from the tribe of the Floating Mountain that no longer floats without magic. They happen to have an army of 4,000 strong, and the fairy queen wants that. Margot still doesn't want to have a marriage alliance, but the queen is forcing her hand. And it doesn't help when Prince S comes by, her, former betrothed and one night stand, who is all like, "Oh, so now you're willing to get married. I see how it is." With all these new people in the castle, it's hard to continue the fairy plan, especially given that the floaters have decided to hole up in that special corridor. Elliot and Quentin are trying to figure out how to use the key on the grandfather clock, the one that Umber had that is a portal to Fillory. They end up finding a keyhole and the clock lights up and a portal opens. They end up finding a spot and the clock lights up and a portal opens, and they briefly discuss getting others, but the key falls out and it sort of makes the choice for them, and they go in together. They've made it back to Fillory, but there's magic in the air now. This isn't the Fillory of today. It's the Fillory of the past, even before the Chatwins came. According to the books, Jane came too late to the mosaic. Somebody else had already completed it. And Quentin thinks that somebody is them. Elliot and Quentin make it to the mosaic and see an old man who's already at it and tells them that it's all theirs as long as they don't mind wasting all of their time. The mosaic itself is made up of 784 tiles in 15 different colors. Quentin starts doing the math to try to figure out how many possibilities there are. Elliot is like, "You're seriously trying to calculate the beauty of life?" And side note, I was like, "Oh, I wonder how many possibilities there are." And let's just say Penny's sentence at the library is a lot shorter than as many possibilities as there are. Margot tries to talk to her future mother-in-law to cancel the marriage, but that just leads to her meeting her intended Prince McDreamy and his weird teenage brother. The Stone Queen lets Margot know that the floaters are a proud matriarchy, that Micah will defer to her. That, and also the fact that she finds him very attractive, settles Margot down a bit, and now she isn't as upset about her upcoming nuptials until an arrow narrowly misses Micah as they're getting ready for the wedding. Margot's immediate thought is that this has something to do with Prince S, who is jealous of her marrying Micah, and she ends up having him locked up. Elliot and Quentin are working on the mosaic, which shouldn't be that hard as magic is back, but unfortunately magic doesn't work on the mosaic. They're gonna have to do it the old-fashioned way. Alice goes to Julia, who is working on something that Penny told her about the astral plane, when whatever spirit takes over and uses Alice to tell Julia that she needs to help Alice. This prompts Julia to put her book down and says, "Hey, let's go get a drink." Margot and Micah are just about to say "I do" when an axe swings down and ends Micah. His younger brother, Prince Fomar, who just usurped his brother, says, "All right, guys, let's get on with this wedding." Margot tries to back out of the marriage, but the queen forces her to marry him. Apparently, in floater culture, it is the surviving son's duty to step in for their brother if they become indisposed. Elliot and Quentin are working on the mosaic, and time starts passing. After a year has passed, the two end up hooking up, and they sort of ignore it, and then Quentin ends up getting involved with a local woman who sells peaches and plums. The two end up having a son, but she ends up passing, leaving Quentin and Elliot to raise him together. More and more time passes, and the son grows up and leaves. Elliot and Quentin keep getting older and older until Elliot finally dies from old age. Quentin goes to bury Elliot, but when he's digging the hole, he finds a mosaic tile. He ends up taking the tile and inserts it into the mosaic, and the key finally appears just as a young Jane Chatwin shows up saying she needs the key to power the watch that she got from the dwarves to create the time loops to stop the beast. Quentin ends up giving her the key, knowing that she has to take it, otherwise they'll never have a chance to defeat the beast. Margot is dealing with an unwanted husband who is urging her to consummate their marriage. She is able to delay that by saying it is earthen customs for the bride to open all the wedding presents first, otherwise his manhood could shrivel up and rot. One of the presents she opens is a key with a note from Quentin. He arranged for the key to show up on the day of her marriage. He tells her if she is reading this message, it means they're already dead. And now he needs her to go find Jane, who apparently isn't completely dead. Jane created a spot in the clock barons that exists separately from the time loops, and that's how she's still alive. Unfortunately, she can't give Margot the key, as it is what is powering the space and keeping it stable. But she can send Margot to Breakabills to get the key from the version of herself that was killed by the beast. Margot gets sent to Breakabills just in time to stop Elliot and Quentin from going into the clock, and is able to stop them from creating the alternative timeline where they die of old age and Fillory. Alice and Julia are at a bar together, and Alice is saying that she doesn't know how to be Alice without magic. She's just really struggling with everything that's been happening. Julia tells her about her theory of getting a little spark of magic from the Lady Underground when she was given her shade back, and Alice is like, well, why don't you figure out what's going on, and has her use the truth key while she looks in a mirror. When Julia looks into the mirror, she sees Reynard's eyes staring back at her, and she gets transported into a room with the Lady Underground, who tells her that yes, she planted the magic inside her, and sure, it came from Reynard, but it isn't his anymore. It's hers. Julia is extremely disturbed by this fact and tells Alice that if she could, she would give this magic to Alice offhandedly. But Alice is like, what if there was a way? Katie tries to sign herself out of the hospital, but the doctors have a video of her talking to Penny, and since no one else could see him without the key, they use it as a reason to keep her and end up sedating her when she tries to run. Margot, Quentin, and Elliot go back to Fillory, where Quentin picks up the note he wrote in that other timeline, while Elliot eats a peach, and then the both of them get hit with flashes from that other timeline. Episode 6. Do you like teeth? Alice is trying to figure out how to transfer Julia's magic when Julia remembers a hedge thing that Marina used to use to steal power from others and wants to try to reverse the process to transfer it to Alice. They go to do the spell, but Penny, using a talking fish, gets them to stop as he's seen the spell before and it ended with everyone getting burned. And it turns out that Dean Fogg was the original creator of the spell, the voltaic transfer. The girls go to him to convince him to share the true spell and find him drunk and upset that 1, Julia hid her magic, and 2, that she wants to get rid of it. After Julia puts a temporary enchantment on Dean Fogg's glasses so that he can see again, he calms down and tells them that they will need the flesh of a magical creature to act as a conductor, specifically an incubus. The Stone Queen approaches Margot about what Tick has been doing in the corridor and tells her that they are on the same side and that she has a weapon that could kill the Fairy Queen. But the conversation ends with Margot being locked in a room with her new teen husband. Alice and Julia track down the incubus, who of course is a hedge fund manager, and they awkwardly say that they need to use his penis to power the spell, and he ends up breaking down laughing, saying, "Oh man, I planted that joke 25 years ago," and then correcting him, saying that no, he doesn't have a Magic Johnson. He doesn't even like sex. Stress is a way better way to drain someone's energy. And he's willing to give them his tail in exchange for their stress, which we all know they have an excess of. The Fairy Queen welcomes Elliot back to Fillory and tells him that he needs to get Margot to legitimize the marriage and, get on with sealing the deal. Margot, who is now trapped in a room with her teenage groom, gets told the only reason that Fomar did what he did is because in floater culture, younger brothers can't marry or inherit. Margot tries to scare him off by giving him a in-depth sex ed lesson, asking if he's into teeth, implying that women have teeth down under. Quentin is disguising himself as a castle guard, as they don't need yet another puppet king. And him and Elliot figure out where the 4th key is. It's somewhere in a stretch of ocean called the Abyss, an uncharted part of Fillory that is in perpetual night. Since Elliot is caught up in castle duties, Quentin has to go alone. And after a charged moment that contains a lifetime of intimacy, Elliot tells Quentin that this means he can do what he's always wanted to do on a boat. Stare meaningfully into the distance while cosplaying a sailor. So Quentin and Benedict set sail for the Abyss. When they enter its borders, they hear a woman crying for help in the darkness and end up rescuing one Poppy Klein, a dragonologist, postgraduate fellow, and field researcher. She happens to be from that fateful spring break trip and knows Josh. She also is acting just a bit suspicious. Prince S gives Elliot a message, and to help Margot, Elliot goes to the Fairy Queen and lets her know what the holdup is, saying that humans don't mate in captivity. They need to go on a honeymoon, specifically a forest with naturally occurring aphrodisiacs. Poppy tells Quentin that she survived on the raft for 3 weeks. Apparently, she found it in a dragon's nest. She slides him the key and wanders off. Alice and Julia are working on the transfer, and Penny is being the worst kind of backseater. They perform the casting, and now Alice has Julia's magic. Quentin is drinking with Poppy on the boat when she physically puts the key into his hand. And when he wakes up, there's another Quentin in the room who is a royal jerk. Apparently, this key takes the darkest parts of yourself and makes a depression monster. It can't hurt you physically, just, psychologically. It only haunts the last person to have touched it, so Poppy advises Quentin to just pass it along. That's what her former shipmates did, which, it led to half of them offing themselves, but Poppy's like, you have no reason to worry, they were already psychologically damaged beforehand. You totally seem like such a well-adjusted person. You'll be fine. Yeah. That's totally how I would describe Quentin. Well-adjusted, not psychologically damaged at all. Quentin is unwilling to pass along the key willy-nilly, but they don't know how long they're going to be stuck in the abyss for, and depression monster Quentin is only going to get worse. It starts with surface level name calling, but gradually starts delving into deeper stuff like how Quentin's the reason that both Julia and Alice's lives have been irrevocably changed, and Quentin tells her that he is on a quest for the golden keys. And Poppy is like, oh, do you mean this? Oh, okay. Elliot takes Margot and Fomar on their honeymoon and gives them both a drink to celebrate. And just as it's kicking in, Margot tells Fomar she's never going to consummate their marriage. Elliot and Margot leave him in the carriage while they go to the northern woods because something funky is going on there. The fairies evacuated an entire village there and haven't let anyone back in since. Prince S happened to be going through the area on his way to Fillory and reported seeing some Chernobyl-level stuff. The fairies are poisoning the ecosystem. They make it to where the orchard is, or should I say was, as it's now full of mushrooms. Quentin and his evil alter ego are overlooking the side of the boat, and he sees a dragon staring back at him. Benedict rushes over and gets him away from the side of the boat, saying like, hey, I understand how you feel, but you can't do that. Benedict relating, saying that his parents always told him to bottle up his emotions. Benedict makes a joke that in the old days when sailors went mad, they used to tie them to the mast, and Quentin's like, you're a genius, you have to tie me up, and don't untie me for any reason until we get back. Alice is getting used to her new magic and makes one of her classic glass horses and re-ups the enchantment on Dean Fogg's glasses as a way of saying thanks. Turns out the fairies are terraforming Fillory into a habitable climate, a verifiable mushroom steam bath. Margot notices a mushroom moving and picks it up to find out that the mushrooms are eggs. The fairies are creating an army. It's a full-scale invasion. Elliot starts going on a rant while Margot ducks out and ends up grabbing a bunch of eggs and saying, it's a hostage situation now. Poppy comes over to Quentin, who is still tied to the mast, and offers to take the key, but he's not willing. And she starts going on saying, wow, these keys really suck, but Quentin's like, well, they're not actually all bad. I mean, the portals they make is pretty useful. And hearing the word portal, she's like, I could leave. And she ends up taking the key back without touching it, leaving Quentin tied to the mast. Quentin yells for Benedict to untie him, but Benedict is following his previous orders and instead just goes after Poppy for the key. He comes back a little bit later and is all like, I'm sorry, I failed, I'm such a disappointment. And the camera pans down to his hand that's holding the key, just as he jumps overboard into the lurking dragon's mouth. Bye-bye, key. Elliot and Margot make their way back to the castle, but Margot still needs to figure out how she's going to consummate her marriage. Luckily, she's come up with a solution, a fanged toad that she uses on Fomar. And when he wakes up, Margot and Elliot gaslight him into thinking the pain he's feeling is the aftermath of him and Margot consummating their marriage. Penny tells Julia that he has to go away. He can't keep watching them like a ghost in their lives. Julia tries to convince him to stay, but he's like, well, that's rich coming from the person who chose to give up their magic. But then Alice chimes in and is like, hey, what if I made you a new body like Mayakovsky did for me? Quentin is trying to figure out how he's going to get that key again when Poppy pops in and is like, you know dragons are gatekeepers, right? They don't poop what they eat. They don't make portals. They are portals. That key, it's in the underworld. Julia is at a park in a dream and Reynard shows up. He's still haunting her even without his magic. Alice is working on creating a new body for Penny, but ends up collapsing as Penny tries to use the talking fish to get someone's attention. Episode 7. Poached Eggs. Margot and Elliot are working on their hostage plan while Quentin needs to talk to Penny. The three of them and Poppy all come back to Breakville's right on time to witness Alice's body rejecting Julia's magic. Julia tells Quentin that she has Alice and tells him to go work on the keys. Quentin needs Penny's help in getting the underworld key. You see, the library has a dragon, a bookworm, that they use to transfer books back and forth. But as you might have guessed by the name, it's too small for an entire human. However, it could fit an astral projection in a book. The only flaw in the plan is that they're going to need another traveler in order to get the key back from the satellite library branch after Penny sends it up. Poppy, the ever so helpful addition, is like, hey, I think I might be able to find Victoria, the traveler that they rescued from the beast. Dean Fogg tells Julia that Alice will die if she keeps Julia's magic. For whatever reason, the magic is only suitable for Julia, and she's gonna have to figure out a way to transfer the magic back. The slight problem is, there's no way that Alice will initiate it, and to initiate it, you need magic. All hope is not lost, as Dean Fogg happens to know a magical opportunist that might just be able to help. The New York City tour is done, and Todd brings the girls back to the cottage. Elliot and Margot flag him down and say, you need to keep an eye on Frey. You can't let her know that we have these fairy eggs. Margot and Elliot end up heading back to Fillory to negotiate with the Queen, but in the time they've been gone, tensions between Florians and the floaters have risen. In exchange for giving the eggs back, they want the Queen's bathtub for all of the Florians. Given that once everybody is in on a fairy deal, they'll finally be able to see them, and they can't just continue to hide. They give her a day to come to an agreement, threatening to give the eggs the Easter treatment if she doesn't. The magical opportunist is Irene McAllister, and Julia goes to her for help in getting her magic back as the McAllisters have reserves. Todd does a terrible job of keeping the eggs hidden, and Frey finds out about them, and then starts getting upset at them, calling them child abductors and claiming that they're so much worse than the fairies because at least the fairies honor their deals. Poppy and Quentin track down Victoria, who is not thrilled to see them, given that Poppy slept with Josh while the two were still dating, but Quentin gives her the truth key so that Penny can try to convince her. The conversation gets derailed when he finds out that she's been working with Harriet. In order to get Victoria in, they need to talk to Harriet, but she's not a Penny fan, and Katie is currently locked up and sedated. Julia makes a deal with Irene for some magic and ends up being given some magic powder in a vial. It turns out the McAllisters aren't relying on batteries. Quentin, Poppy, and Penny are now on a mission to free Katie from the mental ward. The plan is to have Poppy and Quentin pose as doctors evaluating Katie to see if she still needs to be held, while slipping her the key and a badge so that Penny can tell her about the plot to have her walk herself out. But Katie is not interested in their plan and drops the badge, which gets the attention of the real doctor, who goes and grabs it, ruining the plan. Elliot and Margot are having a moment where Elliot's like, maybe we should just regroup and deal with Fillory later, given that they seem to always just make things worse. But Margot is like, unlike you, I chose to be High Queen. I'm not just gonna abandon it. Alice goes to the lab to try to find something that'll help with her magical rejection and ends up running into Professor Lipson, who they saved earlier, and she ends up giving Alice some steroids. Katie still has the truth key and finds out from Penny that he's still trying to sacrifice himself for the group, and gets mad at him for continuing to do so. This helps convince her to join back in on the quest, and he gets her to yell loudly to get a guard to come into the room, and when he does, she hands him the key, shocking him when all of a sudden he can see Penny, and she knocks him out, grabs his badge, and starts to make a run for it. Her escape doesn't go unnoticed, and the ward goes on lockdown, but Poppy, thinking on the fly, sets a fire so that the fire alarm starts going and everyone will be trying to leave the building quickly, and Katie is able to leave the building in the chaos. Julia comes back to Breakbills to find that Alice is missing and uses some of the magic powder to locate her and ends up tracking her down to a car where Alice is trying to get turned into a vampire in order to keep magic. Fen tells Elliot that Frey ran away after finding out about the fairy eggs, and she ends up coming back with the Fairy Queen in tow. The Fairy Queen then threatens to kill Frey if they don't give the eggs back, and Frey, who is feeling betrayed, reveals that she isn't actually their daughter. It turns out that their daughter died at birth. Katie goes to Harriet for getting help into the library, but Harriet's all like, why would I help someone who hasn't even repaid their last favor? Julia tries to get Alice to stop and uses more powder, but Alice gets mad and retaliates and then ends up almost killing her, which gives her a cold reality check, and then Alice decides to transfer the magic back to Julia on her own. Fen and Elliot are grieving the daughter they thought they had, and Fen blames herself for believing in Frey and says that she needs some time and space away from Fillory to deal with this all. Poppy confronts Quentin on his overthinking tendencies as he starts going into a panic spiral, and her method of helping him is to short-circuit him by hooking up with him. Poppy claims it's because everybody seems to have a higher chance of survival when they bring down the tension. Margot and Elliot are back in Fillory and have completed the deal with the Fairy Queen after Freya spilled the beans. The Queen's bathtub now belongs to everyone in Fillory, and the fairies can no longer remain hidden. They're a bit confused by her easy acceptance of the deal and try to ask what her end goal is, just as she leaves them in a carriage as a bunch of angry Fillorians come and carry the pair off into the night. Episode 8, 6 short stories about magic. Penny arrives in the underworld through the book drop in the library. He leaves the building and finds himself in an encampment. With magic being gone, there's issues with people being processed in the underworld. He finds the guy in charge and is like, I need to find somebody, can you help? But how do you bribe a dead guy? With the ending of Game of Thrones. Penny is able to locate Benedict, and Benedict is so happy to see him until he realizes that Penny came for the key and not him. He tells Penny that the library took the key as they're the only functioning part of the underworld, but it also is the most secure. Benedict wants to help Penny, but Penny is unsure of how useful he would be and ends up ditching him. Penny makes it back to the library about to break in when he meets Sylvia, his mentor when he first joined the library. She's been reading his book and offers him some advice. His best bet on getting the key back is by going to the source, the person who writes the books. Cassandra, who happens to just look like a gray-haired Rapunzel Alice, has been the author of the book for thousands of years. when magic was still around, they were able to industrialize the process, but with it being gone again, it's back to her writing everything by hand. Penny tries to talk with her, but she just yells at him to leave, not wanting any company. Cassandra ends up finishing the next page, and it's about Poppy and Quentin picking up where we last left off with them, mid-coitus. Quentin is still overthinking Harriet's plan, and Poppy is like, well, damn, guess my plan failed. And Poppy tells him that she's willing to do the plan and join the quest since she also has a vested interest in getting magic back. Quentin is busy having an existential crisis over the fact that he doesn't know how he's gonna become this so-called hero that finishes this quest. Poppy's like, you don't have to change. The bravest thing a person can do is to embrace themselves, flaws and all, and just accept the consequences. Who's to say that's not the key to the quest? Poppy leaves his room and runs into Alice and is like, well, I hope this isn't awkward. But Alice is deadpan, being like, I'm more concerned about him dying than who he's doing. The more important thing is, how are they going to break into the library? Travelers, as magical creature hybrids, still have their own innate magic that lets them travel, but without external magic, they won't be able to travel anyone with them. In order to break into the library, they don't need Victoria to travel them, they just need her DNA, her blood, to make a mirror bridge. But that would take some genius level calculations to make sure it's safe, and with Alice not on board, Victoria is not game. So what does Poppy do? Well, she goes and steals Alice's Niffin notes on mirror bridges, and now the plan is back on. Harriet's reason for wanting to go to the library is that allegedly some ancient Egyptian librarians made a legendary battery called the Alexandria Cell. And with witnesses seeing librarians still performing big magic, it seems like there might be some substance to that rumor. Victoria makes the mirror bridge and they go in, but they're on a time crunch. In order to sustain it, Victoria needs to be constantly feeding the bridge with her blood. Poppy, Quentin, Harriet, and Katie make it to the library. Harriet seems a little too familiar with the library and ends up directing Poppy and Quentin to where the book chute is. The pair end up waiting for what feels like an eternity, and Poppy eventually goes, "The key's not coming, I'm gonna dip." And as they start heading back, they run into Alice. Poppy ends up leaving through the mirror bridge and tells Victoria that she should go too, but Victoria chooses to stay there, maintaining the mirror bridge, even though you can tell that the blood loss is getting to her. Back in the underworld, Penny is reading pages as fast as they're written and is like, we need to do something! And why is Alice here? Cassandra just continues to write without stopping. So the big question is, how come Alice is in the library? Well, after telling Katie and Harriet that the mirror bridge won't work, she declines Harriet's offer of sharing the library's battery if they could find it. Alice fundamentally disagrees with Harriet's idea of letting the library's knowledge be free for all. Her experience has led her to believe that there is some knowledge that maybe no one should have. After this, Alice is left by herself until Fen comes back in, and they end up drinking and getting introspective, where Fen sort of ends up shaming her, being like, you're making this big deal about knowledge you lost after becoming human again, while I'm over here having to live with the fact that my daughter is just gone. Like, read the room, Alice. You can gain knowledge back, but as far as I know, I'm never gonna have my daughter back. Alice ends up going to a library drop box where she hits it with stones until a librarian comes out, and she tells him that she has something his boss will want, so he ends up bringing her back to the library. When she gets there, she talks to Zelda about wanting a library card, and to finish what she started as a Niffin, a grand unified theory of magic, to which Zelda is like, that won't be necessary, we already have your Niffin experiences cataloged, we won't be needing your service. But that just makes Alice think that there's something about her book that makes them not want her to do this. Zelda does, however, say there is something that Alice could do for them, and in exchange, she'd have full access to the library. It has to do with the quest, but Zelda ends up getting called away before she can tell her. And then we're back at the moment where Alice runs into a surprise Quentin. Penny is trying to urge Cassandra to give an answer to no avail, while Elliot is talking to a wombat about all of the bad things he's faced since coming to Fillory, but ultimately he leaves off. Even after all of these experiences, he still wants to help Fillory because Fillory was there for him in his time of need. Fen, who is still at Brakebills, sees Julia meeting with Irene at the cottage, and she notices that there's a fairy with Irene. Irene has come to collect the favor from Julia. Irene has a bunch of scars on her stomach. She says it's a side effect from using that magic powder that she got from Julia. She can't treat herself as it would just make the problem worse, and so she ends up giving Julia a list of spell components and leaves. Fen goes to Julia and is like, red alert, you have a fairy issue. I think fairies are controlling Irene. But Julia is unconcerned, but is actually curious instead, reflecting on what Penny said about there being weird creatures at Irene's house, and thinks that there might be more. Fen is starting to panic, but Julia is like, wait, can you describe again how that fairy was acting? Because it sounds a lot more like it was being treated like a servant than being a puppet master. These fairies might actually be enslaved, and if so, Julia's magic grows by helping others. When Irene comes back for the favor, Julia gets Fen to go to talk to Irene's fairy. The fairy is really nervous and doesn't want to speak to Fen, but Fen ends up using Irene's presence to threaten the fairy, and she begins to speak. And it becomes blatantly obvious that these fairies are being held captive, but even though the fairy, Sky, seems to think that the McAllisters are protecting them from the bad magicians. She questions Fen how she can even see her, as none of them have made a deal with her, but that plants a seed of doubt in Sky that there are more fairies out there, and she ends up agreeing to talk with them the following day while Irene is out. Fen and Julia break into Irene's house and find Sky strapped to a table, now with a missing leg. The magic powder, yeah, it comes from fairies. It is fairy. Back to the past, a young girl is running around the library and gets stopped by Zelda, who signs to her. The little girl, Harriet, is looking for Fillory, but Zelda cautions her about getting lost or hurt. If she leaves the library, she could end up growing up without Zelda. Well, wouldn't you know it, the freedom fighter is the daughter of the head librarian. Harriet grows up and goes to Brakebills. And ends up coming back to Zelda like any liberal college student and is like, hey, what you're doing is wrong. The library shouldn't be so safeguarded. People should have access to this knowledge. And Zelda is like, I never should have sent you to Brakebills, and Harriet ends up getting suspended from the library. The next time Harriet comes back to the library, it is as an adult. Zelda is happy to see her and asks if she would consider coming back to work for the library since the Great Blank Spot is coming up. Harriet is like, yeah, I'd come back in a heartbeat if you guys open the library and let some of my friends in. But Zelda is like, you know that I love you, but I can't do that. You have a penchant for befriending criminals. That by itself could be the very reason for the Great Blank Spot. Harriet argues that they aren't going to fix what's coming by reading a book. What they need to do is to start trusting in others to do the right thing, but Zelda is like, I can't do that. A crisis isn't the time to abandon your principles. Back to the present, Harriet is coordinating the group on where to go in the library. She ends up taking Katie with herself to try to find the battery. The two go down to the priceless artifact room, but don't find anything until a librarian comes into the room and opens a briefcase full of vials of white powder that looks suspiciously familiar. Katie knocks him out and opens the bottle, and yep, it's grade A fairy powder. The two go to leave with the briefcase, but end up running into Zelda. Harriet urges Katie to run back while she confronts her mom about the alleged battery and whatever the magic powder is, but Zelda tells her that she wouldn't want to know. Harriet tries to make it back through the mirror bridge with the briefcase intact, but a librarian comes up and shoves her. Harriet and Victoria try to run back through the other side of the bridge, but the librarian shatters the mirror as a horrified Zelda watches on. Penny is freaking out, saying they left the library without getting the key, trying to get Alice's help, but Cassandra is like, I'm not Alice, and just continues writing. Penny is getting upset and throws her papers on the floor, and then she gets up and hands him a page, the one with the sex scene between Quentin and Poppy that he just skimmed over, where Poppy claims it's only so long until she does something stupid. And this is where the bells go off for Penny. He was stupid. He runs back to Benedict because that's right, the key never left him. He was just testing Penny to see if he was really his friend. Benedict ended up burying the key because in his mind, he thought if Penny never found it, Penny would never leave. Penny ends up apologizing to him and is like, hey man, when I died, you were the only one who cried. So you know what? I'm gonna get Sylvia to hook you up with the library's maps. Penny and Sylvia go to put the key in the drop, but before he can become the book, Sylvia closes the book drop and says, I'm sorry. Back in the library, Quentin and Katie run into each other on the way out, and then hear the dragon in the book drop going off, and then backtrack, grabbing the key before they make it safely through the mirror bridge. In the underworld, Penny is busy being taken away by the librarian's goons. Episode 9. All That Josh. If you had any hope that Victoria and Harriet made it out somehow, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they didn't. But the group has the fourth key now, so it's not all bad. Katie picks up the truth key to try to talk to Penny, but unbeknownst to her, Penny's still in the underworld. Quentin has banned Alice from looking at the quest book until she tells them the true reason she was at the library. And not just because she wants to create a grand unified theory of magic. The next quest prompt is confusing and it looks like a bunch of code. Alice recognizes it as sheet music and goes to play it, but Katie takes over as this isn't just any ordinary sheet music, it's medieval music. After the first scale, the scene changes and now there's a bunch of people in the cottage now. Like, it looks like Todd and Josh are throwing a party. And we get greeted with a Josh-centric musical number. And Quentin's like, I think we really found it. The bad place. Katie goes to leave, but there aren't any doors. Just numerous photos of Josh. Josh comes over and lets them know that the house rule is to be the vibe. Either have a blast or leave. Josh and Todd don't seem to be concerned with whatever is happening because magic's back. Fen and Julia come back to the cottage, the real one, and it is unchanged and no party in sight. There's just the sheet music left on the piano. After seeing what's been going on with the Earth Fairies, Julia is set on saving them. Fen is still resistant, but is starting to fold under Julia's persistence that things are different here, especially without magic. If you were confused as to why Elliot was talking to a wombat last episode, don't worry. Me too. There's a funny reason. Apparently, after getting taken in by the rebels, they requested a trial by combat to exonerate themselves. That was miscommunicated, and it was understood that they wanted a trial by wombat instead, only in Fillory. Unfortunately, they have been found guilty and now face execution. Silver lining is that they get to choose the method, and so they try to get Tick to help them to choose whichever one is the slowest possible, which ends up being the infinite waterfall. Quentin and Alice try to use magic to figure out what's going on in Party World, but are faced with the reality that only party tricks are possible. Katie starts getting really tense, and the crowd of people turn on her and start to grab at them. In a panic, Alice starts singing Happy Birthday to try to bring back the vibes, and it works. So then Katie takes up the role of distraction and dons a ball gown while Quentin and Alice go to corner Josh privately. Julia takes the truth key and goes back to talk to the McAllisters to talk with the fairies, and we're met with the sad sight of Skye stumbling around trying to work without a leg. In the conversation they have, it seems like Skye was led to believe that fairies don't have magic, and that they're under the guise that the McAllisters are keeping them safe. But Julia's like, what if I could prove to you that fairies can do magic? And get Skye to meet her in the lab as soon as she can get away. Katie is putting on an entire production when Todd stops her because she's singing in the wrong key. Quentin and Alice have Josh tied up, and Josh is getting increasingly annoyed and frustrated with them, saying that they know next to nothing about him, and while he's been wanting to help with the quest, they've just been ignoring him. Katie ends up going behind a screen and leaves a shadow puppet entertaining the crowd so that she can join in on the interrogation with Josh, who is saying that the quest doesn't matter anymore because magic's back. But when he tries to get himself out of the ropes, his magic doesn't work. Elliot and Margot are being taken to the infinite waterfall aboard the Munchak. Tick is there with them, and they try to get him to help, but he's like, why would I help you? I want to be king. It's about time that the children of Earth stop messing with Fillory. With magic being gone, the kingdom can finally be his. Skye shows up to the lab and works with Julia to try to use magic, but since Julia only has experience being a human magician, it's hard for her to try to teach a fairy how to use their own innate magic. Fen chimes in that she's never seen a fairy do the hand-tutting that magicians do. So Julia ends up changing her approach and tells Skye to imagine a flower growing out of her hand. Josh tells them that after he was abandoned at Bacchus's party, Todd showed up and was like, I found the fifth key, and invited him into this realm, and is also sort of in charge of it, but he's been acting suspicious. Alice figures something out, but in order to confirm it, she needs Josh to run distraction. While he does this, she shares with the rest of them that Todd isn't Todd, but rather a Traumeister, a demon who creates pocket worlds where all your dreams come true while it feeds off of your joy. The demon has the key, and it has the thing for music. The key is in the piano. Elliot and Margot have a moment of introspection over Fillory and how while it's been a hot mess, there was that one time after the Idri wedding when everything wasn't so bad. And Margot ends up telling the Munchak that she doesn't have to listen to Tick and can do whatever she wants. But as the boat gets closer and closer to the infinite waterfall, Tick ends up abandoning ship, leaving them trapped. Skye is finally able to use her magic and creates a flower, but just before she can celebrate, she starts bleeding from all of her orifices and then gasping for air. Julia's eyes glow and then freezes Sky in place, noticing that the necklace that Sky is wearing keeps them from using magic and will attempt to kill them when they do. But luckily, Julia was able to stop it. Katie picks up the 5th key and a sign lights up, an exit sign directing questers towards a door. Her, Alice, and Quentin look towards the door and then all of a sudden start hearing Penny saying he's new here. Penny isn't here, he's still in the underworld, but it seems like the 5th key's power is to mind link them. It links all of them, including Elliot and Margot, as well as Julia, who is currently trying to stop Sky from dying. The 5th key links all the questers together, including Josh. It seems like it brought them to the world of the quester who felt left behind to make the point that in this quest, they need unity. It's going to take all of them working together to complete this quest to bring magic back. Josh is currently in danger from the angry crowd and needs help, so Quentin, of course, starts another musical number, and the entire cast go through a rendition of Under Pressure. And something of note is that Katie and Elliot are the standouts in this number. Now, to the tune of Under Pressure, we have Elliot and Margot going over the edge, Alice, Katie, and Quentin picking up Josh, the Munchak flying over the waterfall, and Julia's eyes glowing again to make Sky stable again. The song finishes and Demon Todd turns back into his true form and tells them that this was a favor for an old friend who was sure they'd ace it even when he started to have his doubts that they'd even show up for how long Josh has been here. The link gets stopped and the 4 of them get sent back to Breakabills. The truth key is missing, but it's all good as Julia walks back in with it and is like, "Oh, hey Josh, you never called me back. It's so great to see you again." Well, Josh, it seems like you too have some issues to work on. Welcome to the Questers. Now that they have the 5th key, they are on chapter 6 of the quest. And as Alice goes to pick up the book, Quentin gives her a look that says she's still banned. Episode 10. The Art of the Deal. Katie takes the 5th key and dips. Alice is still upset about her quest banding, saying, "Hey, how come Katie gets to take the key, but I can't even look at the book? That's so hypocritical. You're trusting a heroin addict more than me." Quentin stands his ground, saying, at first Alice didn't want anything to do with the quest, and now she's practically dying to get it back. She's complicated, and he doesn't trust her intentions. Alice's response is, of course she wants magic back. Alice's response is, of course I want magic back, but how do you expect me to want to go on a magical quest when her dad's body is still warm? It's messed up that Quentin is allowed to be depressive, but she's always expected to be on her A game. Julia tries to pass through the room quietly and unnoticed, but they hear her and it ends up diffusing the conversation where the two decide to argue it out after the quest, and Alice is allowed to take the book for now. The 6th key is in the throne room of Whitespire, which is really bad timing given that they just all got ousted from the throne. Julia chooses to not join them on this part of the quest as she's busy trying to free the fairies, so she needs to stay here. Sky is letting the other fairies know about the new developments, but they can't escape until they're free from the necklaces. Julia needs Fen's help, but she's unwilling at first until Julia uses the power of emojis to convince her. What they need is a necklace that isn't already attached to a fairy, so they end up meeting with Irene and tell her they know about the fairies and use Fen's hatred of them to convince her that they're on her side and that they need something to control their own fairy problem. Irene lets them in on how they control the fairies, saying that her uncle Edwin makes the silver collars, but in exchange for one, they want a fairy. Penny has been put back on librarian duty. This time he's shackled to a book cart as he's reshelving books, and the librarian that he indirectly got killed by giving him the overdue book from Harriet that made him go towards the poison room, in which he stopped himself by, ends up coming up to him and inviting him to his book club. Penny isn't accepting that he's dead and declines. Sylvia comes up to him and tries to explain why she turned him in. After magic went away, her family ended up being killed and they came to the underworld. Penny interjects and is like, cool for you, but my people are still living without me. But the underworld isn't the final destination after death. It's just a way station. And when people get settled in their death, they move on. Her family's already gone. And just like Penny, Sylvia has her own billion-year contract. The bounty on Penny reduces her time by 1,000,000 years. It allows her to get to her family sooner. After their handshake deal, Julia gets a collar from Edwin and finds out that 1, the oldest fairy in the family is 400 years old, and 2, that the only way to get the collar off is with a special device that Edwin made. So now they have an idea of what they need to get the collars off, but Skye reports that the other fairies don't believe her, and now all of a sudden we have more McAllisters and their fairies showing up. Josh, Quentin, and Alice join Elliot and Margot aboard the Flying Muntjac. The plan is to break into Whitespire to get the 6th key, which only reveals itself in the light of the 2 half moons, which conveniently is happening tonight. Tig is out of the castle as he's dealing with the war with Loria and the floaters. Elliot and Margot decide not to join them and instead drop them off at the castle as they too want to focus on stopping the war. Julie and Fen have an audience with the Fairy Queen and tell her about the Earth Fairies and ask for her help in freeing them, but she's doubtful as, according to her, there aren't any more fairies left on Earth, as they all fled due to human magicians nearly hunting them to extinction. Fen makes a very valid point in that why would she, of all people, come to the Queen if this wasn't true? And I mean, the only reason she has is because the Earth Fairies are innocent, unlike the Fillory ones. Penny is watching a room in the library called Secrets Taken to the Grave, and asks what it's all about, and learns that it's a place for people to go to spill their secrets and lighten their load so that they can move on. Once they release their burdens, they get a Metro card out of here. And yes, there is a subway out of the underworld, but it's a long pig that takes people to where they need to go. The quest describes the daughter finally becoming a knight, and her shield catches on a moonbeam that reflects the light, a clue that they need to direct the moonlight to the right spots in order to reveal the key. Alice is working on making that happen, as since the 6 keystone doors are nowhere near a window and they need something to reflect the light. The Fairy Queen comes to Earth and Julia wants her to put on the slave collar so that she can directly go to talk with the other fairies, as they need to be extra careful as they don't know if the McAllisters can remotely trigger the collars. The Fairy Queen doesn't really want to do it, but ends up agreeing to the plan after Julia reveals that she has God-touched powers. They bring her to the McAllisters, which is gearing up to be a big family reunion. It seems like something big is going on. The Queen gets taken to where the other fairies are being held captive, and she gets emotional over the sorry state that they're in. Fen is looking around the house trying to find the device to break collars when Edwin comes into the lab. Apparently, a client is wanting their entire supply, so they need to harvest more. He uses the collar removing device, which isn't really a device, but rather a guillotine. Margot and Elliot are in negotiations with King Idri and the Stone Queen, but since they're deposed royals who don't have valid marriages, they're facing an uphill battle. Margot's big idea is to convince them that they're getting magic back. The pair, good cop, bad cop, their respective targets, with Elliot getting frisky with King Idri and Margot threatening the Throne Queen that they are getting magic back. The whole situation ends with them promising to help find potential magicians in their own people so that they eventually can have their own magicians. So yeah, the big secret's out. There isn't a machine to remove the collars, as the collars themselves are a fairy deal, and fairy deals can't be broken. Dust, the oldest fairy here, made the deal to protect the rest of the fairies by sacrificing the few to the McAllisters. He was protecting his queen, who is the current queen's mother. They can't just break the deal, even if it means they'll die, since the fact that they honor their deals aids and helps in their survival. Edwin comes back to the dungeon to grab another fairy, and Fen and Julia try to stop him, but he just magics them out of the way. As he begins to drag another fairy away, the queen makes up her mind and uses her own blood to break the fairy deal, freeing the fairies. They all disappear, but in reality they are just invisible as the McAllisters no longer have a deal with them. As the fairies descend upon their meal, making it the McAllisters' last supper, as the fairies take revenge. Penny is watching the secrets taken to the grave room like a hawk when a guy steps out with a Metro card, and Penny goes up to him and warns him about how bad the afterlife is and ends up scaring the guy away, but not before he drops his card. But before Penny can pick up the card, a man stops him and says they need to talk. The man tells Penny that he has never seen someone fight their destiny so hard while simultaneously rocketing themselves towards it. And this man, well, he's no man, he's a god. More specifically, he's Hades, the god of the underworld. He tells Penny that the quest doesn't matter. Magic always comes back. Sure, it could take a millennia, but it always comes back, as it's the carrot that the gods use to keep mortals in check. Hades says that Penny's life didn't really start until now, and given enough time, and what happened won't really matter. He nails it on the head that Penny's always sacrificing himself for others as a way to remind them that he matters too. Penny is only going to be shackled for as long as he rejects his new reality. Hades won't stop Penny from fumbling around trying to get back to his old life, as impossibly unlikely as it is, but if he chooses to stay down here, he has an amazing destiny waiting for him. There are far worse places that Penny could find himself in than the library. The conversation ends, and Penny takes the Metro card. Alice is working on getting the mirrors in place, and Quentin uses the opportunity to grill her and ask if she's working with the library. She says yes, but not to stop the quest. They also want magic back. But the big question is that if they want magic back too, then why have they been going after Harry and Victoria and Penny? Josh finds out in real time that his ex is dead and ends up breaking into one of his secret stashes he made while he was Temp King, while Alice and Quentin continue to argue. After Josh is inebriated, he has an aha moment and says, "I know where the key is." Penny ends up giving the Metro card to Sylvia, telling her that he doesn't hate her and he wants her to be able to see her family. Julia is talking with the Fairy Queen and tells her that she's sorry that she couldn't save more fairies, but the Fairy Queen is grateful that there were any to be saved. Julia says she won't tell anyone about her breaking the deal, but there are consequences to broken vows, and by doing so, it means that their word means nothing now. The Queen is surprised that Julia was willing to go so far to help the fairies, especially without anything in return, and laments that maybe if more humans were like her, then they could have coexisted. She lets Julia know that There is a key in the fairy realm. It's what created and sustains the realm, but without it, everything would collapse, and hence is the reason that they can never give it up. Penny goes back to the librarian that he inadvertently kills, Howard, and asks him if the offer for the book club still stands. He ends up getting his chain unlocked and he eats a cupcake. And if anybody knows underworld lore, you know what that means. No, Penny, you're dead! You're dead! Episode 11, 23. The former royals now have wanted posters posted around the realm, which is a bummer because now they can't just freely move around and meet the Fairy Queen to talk about the 6th key. The only one who's not going to get shot on sight is Josh, since he was only the royal version of a substitute teacher, and he gets chosen to make it back through the Earth portal to find Julia, who now has a decent relationship with the Fairy Queen. Julia lets Dean Fogg know what happened with the McAllisters. A lot of them are gone, but Irene is still out there. After helping the fairies, her magic has a noticeable boost, and she was able to re-put up all the wards around Brakebills, so hopefully they won't have to worry about Irene here, and now the school is Dean Fogg's once again. Josh makes it back to Brakebills and finds out from Julia about the whole fairy realm key situation, and the two of them are talking until they get pulled into a Tesla flexion, the magical device that allows different timelines to communicate that Quentin and Julia used to talk with Alice 23 about shades. But this time, it's alternative timeline Josh who has pulled them in, and he's also from the 23rd timeline. In their timeline, they're still dealing with the Beast in a world that has also lost magic. They don't know why, but the Beast still has magic. Josh 23 theorizes that it might have something to do with the key around his neck. The 2 minutes finish, and his final words are that they are the only hope for them. Somehow, it seems as if the Beast in that timeline has managed to get the 7th key, and since they can't get the 6th, who says they can't now go for the 7th? Julia says they should take this information back to the others since they have only been going after keys once the book gives them knowledge, and because this quest thing has sort of been Quentin's whole thing. Josh is bummed, but he accepts. He had been excited about the prospect of a Josh-Julia adventure. They head through the Fillory portal, but find themselves in the lab where Josh 23 is. The portal took them to the 23rd timeline. Marina is also here, but in this timeline, Julia and Marina never met because in every other timeline, Julia went to Brakebills. The situation here is that they don't know why magic went out, but the Beast has been targeting magicians, so the Hedge Witches and Brakebills have teamed up. Julia is not forthcoming about her ability to still do magic and instead keeps it a secret. She tells them that they want the key that the Beast has, and Marina agrees that they can have it as long as they help them kill the Beast. The Joshes share their respective life paths. They both dealt with spring break trip gone bad, but unlike how our Josh got rescued by the gang, no one showed up for Josh 23. After the situation talks, they all end up sharing a drink that just so happens to be roofied. Julie and Josh wake up to find themselves tied up because apparently the Beast has been asking for Julia, which didn't make sense due to the fact that Julia 23 has been dead. Julia tries to convince them that they don't have to offer her to the Beast as they were able to successfully deal with the Beast in their timeline using the Rhinoman Ultra, and they can just do it again. Marina scoffs, saying, "Don't you need God-level magic to cast that?" And this is the moment where Julia decides it's time to share her cards, and she uses her God-level magic to release herself before healing Marina's wounds and her nicotine addiction. It's a very convincing show of magic, and now they just need to get the spell from Dean Fogg and they'll all be set. Good thing he's still around and in amazing health. The Joshes stay behind as reciprocal hostages, while Marina takes her to Dean Fogg, who she has a better relationship with in this timeline. And she's curious about how Julia seems to know so much about him, given that she didn't attend Brakebills. And Marina is like, "Did you sleep with him?" And to that, Julia is horrified, but Marina's response seems to insinuate that she knows that Dean Fogg isn't a bad lay, so there's that. Marina asks about her other self, and Julia neglects to tell her about her demise, and now it seems like someone's watching them from a distance. They end up making it to Dean Fogg, and he's shocked to see Julia alive, because this version of Dean Fogg still has his eyesight. Unfortunately, Bigby, the pixie who has the Rhinoman Ultra, is dead and he doesn't know where the spell is. He sent 2 students to find it, but they died. It's not all bad news, as they're ghosts now and they might be able to pass the spell along. Josh is upset at Josh 23 for roofieing them, but Josh 23 is like, "You wouldn't understand. I haven't roofied or betrayed my friends yet," which is a weird thing to say, made weirder by Josh 23 being like, "Oh, you know the quickening?" And Josh is like, "I don't know." And Josh 23 is like, "Oh, don't worry about that. You should just feel lucky that you didn't bang a werewolf." Whoops. Josh did that too. Julia and Marina make it to the library and we meet the ghosts, Elliot and Margot. They were working on a cooperative spell to get enough power to do the spell, as Bigby said they couldn't handle the Rhinoman, which was right, as we hear the spell fail and Julia is able to snap a picture of the castings. We finally figure out who was stalking them. It's Penny 23, who runs up on Julia and is like, "OMG, you're alive!" And he goes to kiss her, calling her his soulmate. He heard a rumor that the Beast is looking for Julia, so he had to come looking for her. And he ends up offering her his services as a traveler, saying it could come in handy, and also that he just doesn't want to lose Julia again. Josh tries to ask Josh 23 about the quickening, but he won't say and is instead like, "It's not fair how you get to be with Julia when I'm stuck with Marina," which is a choice he made because when she dies, it won't hurt as much. So maybe he's just pushing everyone away as to not get hurt. The Beast appears and goes after Josh, but Josh 23 steps in the way and gets hurt instead. Julia goes to cast the spell, but it gets stopped. The moths hiding his face disappear, and then we can clearly see the Beast again, but it's not Martin Chatwin. It's Quentin, who then says, "Oh, the key didn't lie." He starts moving towards them and Penny is like, "Hey, I can travel us, but I just don't have magic." But Julia does, so she powers up the sigils and they're able to escape. This whole situation is confusing, as Alice 23 told them that Quentin 23 died, shade and all, and in order to survive a hit from the Rhinoman Ultra, like the Beast Quentin just did, you'd need to have an awful lot of power. Penny travels them to a branch of the library, but there aren't any librarians there, and this Penny doesn't work for the library. In order to find out more about what happened to make Quentin go from being dead to the Beast, what they really need to do is to find Alice. She's in Fillory now. After she was called into the Tesla flexion and saw Quentin again, she was desperate to do anything to bring him back. And there's a creature in the Northern Marsh that can give you just about anything for a price. Alice made a deal with it that her shade won't go to the underworld when she dies, but instead will belong to the creature. In doing so, the creature brought back Quentin, but without his shade. Alice figured they could do something after the fact in order to get his shade back, but without his shade, Quentin wasn't the same and was filled with the desire to hoard Fillory for himself. Quentin killed the beast and then killed Ember and took his power for himself, which is the reason why the gods took away magic in this timeline. Quentin was so paranoid of magic coming back and anything killing him that he started targeting magicians. It seems like without his shade, Quentin has a deeper understanding of Martin. Alice is now on a ship working for a bunch of radish smuggling rabbits whose only purpose for her is to stack boxes. The ship is the only thing that can't be tracked by Quentin. She's been working on a way to kill Quentin and found the god-killing knife from the knife maker. And this time around, Julia, with her god powers, can pick it up no biggie. Josh is still worried about the quickening as it's starting to sound more and more like murder herpes. And Penny 23 threatens him, saying, if you as so much as touch a hair on Julia's head, I will kill you. Marina wants to use Alice's bait, but Julia's resistant to the idea, and she finally tells Marina what happened to her in the other timeline, with her being used as bait for Reynard and ending up dead. Julia instead wants to use Quentin's quirks against him. They travel to the castle and find it a museum dedicated to Fillory and Further. They try to travel directly into the throne room, but Quentin has wards up. Alice walks up to Quentin while Julia sneaks behind him and asks him why he didn't kill her. And he tells her it's because she was doing a good enough job torturing herself. And he reveals that the reason he's pretending to be the Beast when he didn't like the Beast is because, well, why wouldn't he? If everybody thinks the Beast is invincible, why not use it to his advantage? He tells Alice that he knows she's just stalling for time and cuts her off, literally. Julia appears behind him and puts her shade in his body to unbeast him and asks him how he found the key. He tells her that he heard it could be used to bring back magic, so he found it first. It seems like this key gives visions of the future, and Julia's like, I know you saw me killing you, but I'm not gonna do that. But Quentin's like, no, that's not what I saw. I saw you opening a lock at the end of the world, and while you were trying to let magic back in, you also let back in something much worse. A monster. One that makes Quentin look like a kid wearing their father's shoes. He tells her to take her shade back just as he kills himself, and she takes her shade and the key. Josh takes the key and tries to get a portal open, but nothing is happening as Marina watches on. Penny asks Julia if the key showed her anything, and she says, nope. And Penny is like, well, I guess that means you don't know I'm coming with you. Since their Penny is dead, there's a space available for him, and there's nothing here for him, so why would he not follow her? Josh runs back into the room where they are and is like, hey guys, there's a portal, and Marina already ran through. And now Julia, Josh, and Penny 23 go through, taking the key with them. Episode 12, The Fillorian Candidate. Usually when an episode starts, we get a recap of what's been going on and also a hint to what previous things might be important this episode. But this time, it's Josh telling Penny 23 about what's been going on in Timeline 40. Saying that everybody except for Penny 40 became kings and queens of Fillory, that there were a lot of hookups, especially Josh, and that Penny 40 ultimately just had a really bad go at it here. You know, he had issues with his hands not working, he signed a billion-year contract with the library to try to save Katie, who Penny 23 has never even met, and now it just really sucks for Katie because she's been lost without Penny. Josh even shares a hookup/murder chart, and of course there are a lot of tangled lines. Katie comes into the room and is ecstatic that Penny's back, but oops, it's the wrong Penny. Quentin and Alice are talking about the knowledge that they got from Quentin 23, while Julia just looks really distracted. Alice wants to figure out what Quentin 23 meant by a monster being let out when they bring magic back, but Quentin is like, he was the Beast, I don't trust him. But Alice is pushing for caution as every time they abandon it, magic goes away. She ends up going to the library to see if they have any information about this monster. Quentin then asks Julia to get Penny 23 to follow behind Alice and spy on her because he doesn't trust Alice or the library. Julia goes to Penny 23, who is busy looking through headlines to try to wrap his head around what's been going on in this timeline. And she's like, hey, I know you had a thing going on with Julia 23, but we both know that we're strangers to each other and don't have that kind of relationship. But you know, this whole wanting to get magic back seems like a big enough deal to make this kind of ask. And Penny 23 looks like a love-struck man who is just waiting patiently for his lover to realize that they're in love with him. At the library, Zelda is telling Alice about the castle at the end of the world, and that it was built by the gods. It's secret by demand. It wasn't meant to be known by mortals. There could be a monster there, or it could just be a tall tale to scare off mortals. But if they really want answers, then they need to talk with someone who's been inside, a god. In other news, Zelda shows Alice a siphon. It requires a lot of magic to power it, and since the library no longer has their intended power to source it, since the fairies have been freed by Julia's magic would be strong enough to power it if it was implanted inside of it. But she'd never go for that if she knew what it was meant for. So Zelda gives Alice a vial of fairy powder in order to take it by force. Alice is hesitant, and rightfully so, because doing that could kill Julia. But Zelda makes it clear that this siphon needs to be charged before magic can be brought back on, and cuts herself off, saying they all have made sacrifices in the pursuit of the greater purpose. Alice ends up taking the siphon and the fairy powder, saying she needs some time to figure out another way to do this. But Zelda warns her that once magic starts flowing again, they only have 30 seconds to attach the siphon, and if they miss that window, their chance is gone forever, or until magic gets turned off again and turned on again. Astral Penny 23 witnesses this all. Josh and Fen go back to Fillory with the gift of Taco Tuesday and knowledge for Elliot and Margot. Elliot tells Fen that since he isn't king anymore, she isn't beholden to stick around anymore. But she's like, if I wasn't promised to marry you even before I was born, I would still be in my tiny small village, married to one of those obnoxious boys that I live next to who, by the way, wanted to throw you over a waterfall. What do you think they'd do to me as your wife? There isn't any old life for her to go back to. There's only moving forward. Margot is working on negotiating with the Fairy Queen, but she is not very receptive. Fen has an idea that might get her attention. They go to Frey to ask if she has a way of contacting the Fairy Queen, but since the Queen almost killed her the last time they saw each other, she's not very thrilled with the idea. Frey is also just stuck in a limbo of some sorts where she can't go back to the fairies, but she also doesn't belong with the humans. Elliot tries to make an argument that they want to deal with the fairies to, try to bridge the gap between fairies and humans, but Frey's like, wait a minute, I didn't say I was lonely. She actually has a talking bear for a boyfriend. It's taboo in Fillory, but since the relationship is consensual, Margot, who has been talking to said bear boyfriend, is like, you do you, boo, no harm, no foul. Elliot turns to Frey and is like, you know what? I'll tell you what I wish my dad told me growing up. I'm so happy you're dating a bear. Alice comes back from the library and tells them some of what she learned while she was there, and is like, we need to get in contact with a god. But that sounds a lot easier than is done, since none of them have been able to get in contact with a god, and they can't even find Bacchus anymore. Alice leaves the room, and Penny 23 comes in and shares what Alice left out of her trip. Mainly about the siphon and how they need Julia's magic to power it. Katie takes the Unity walkie-talkie key, and Penny 23 walks in and is like, "Are you trying to talk to the other Penny?" And she gets offended and says, "No, you're the other Penny." In her mind, everybody is chilled that they have another Penny back, that it's not a big deal that he's from a different timeline. But for her, her Penny is still out there and needs her help. Penny 23 just smiles at her and is like, "Well, damn, all the stuff you're doing for your Penny, the only one who would do it for me in my timeline is Julia." But Katie is like, I hate to tell you, but this Julia is different. And then goes on to explain how she's still haunted by Reynard and that it's his magic that is inside of her. Penny 23 is like, "Wait, you're telling me that Reynard could still be out there without his power? And only gods know what's behind the door, so you know what that means. We need to find Reynard." Elliot, Margot, and Fen have Frey invite the Fairy Queen for some negotiations. They want to give the fairies a place in Fillory to call home in exchange for the key. But the Queen is like, "Why would I do that when I can just wait for your petty wars to finish and claim the lands from the rubble? Fairies have long lives. We can just wait you out." But they have recently learned an interesting tidbit about fairies from Frey. Apparently, in the fairy realm, there aren't any fairy children, which explains why they have a bunch of eggs in the northern orchard. The fairies can't reproduce in the fairy realm. Without Fillory, the fairies will go extinct. The Queen doesn't have a response for that, but tells them that they don't currently speak for Fillory. If they want a deal, they need to come back with either a crown or an army. Julia tries to pray to the Lady Underground, but nothing happens. Instead, she hears a noise coming from the other room and goes to investigate it to find Dean Fogg on the ground, who claims that he didn't say anything. Something strange is going on with Julia. She woke up with a ring in her ears, and now it seems as if she can feel what other people are feeling. Dean Fogg is like, "Well, that makes sense. You were given the power of a god, and if I was a spiritual person, I would think that you're hearing prayers." Julia's like, "I heard your desperation," which he denies, but then she goes on to ask if she can try to fix his eyes. He says he's not interested, as using magic to fix his eyes risks the chance that it changes the very core of him. Julia isn't a regular magician, though, and asks for the chance to fix him, which she does. Aboard the Munchak, Elliot, Margot, and Josh are having a Taco Tuesday and lamenting over their current problem. They need the key to bring back magic, they need their thrones to get the key, and they need magic to get back their throne. They discuss how they could get their thrones back, and come to the conclusion that the only way they can do so without having to kill Tick is to have an election. But Tick would never call for one if he didn't have to. So, how do they force an election? One short trip to Kinko's and thousands of flyers later, when the Fillorians hear about an election happening, Tick can't stop it. Elliot tells Margot that they can't put her name on the ticket, saying they're running for king, and as much as they're trying to bring Fillory into the 20th century, running a woman right now just doesn't seem feasible. Josh is in the middle of campaigning when Julia shows up, saying she felt he needed her help. They end up going to the forest that she burned down while she was missing her shade, and he asks her if she could fix it, since magic is the only thing that makes the children of Earth special. Julia uses her magic, and a little sapling comes up, and then her eyes glow, and an entire forest sprouts up. Luckily, a couple of Fillorians were in the area and witnessed this, and Josh slyly hands them a flyer and says, "Vote for the children of Earth." Quentin confronts Alice about the siphon, and she tells him the siphon is just meant to divert magic to the library so then they can choose who gets it. She defends it by saying that Quentin himself only got access to magic because a group of individuals accepted him into Brakebills, and that if he didn't pass their test, he would have been blissfully unaware of magic. Quentin disagrees that the library should be the ones deciding who gets magic, as they aren't the greatest group of people. But Alice rebuts it, saying, well, neither are we. At least the library has information and perspective. Quentin accuses Alice of being terrified of what she'll do if she has access to magic again, saying that people make mistakes so that they can change and do better, but only when they're given the chance. Taking away choice is not the answer. And ends his point with the fact that there are 7 keys and 8 questers. They can do this without her unless she gives him the siphon. She gives it to him, but reminds him what magic coming back on means for his dad. Josh comes back with great news. Since Julia has been performing feats of magic, the children of Earth are doing amazing in the polls. Tick is struggling to combat magic since he's only been king for all of 5 minutes. The people just haven't gotten a chance to see what he stands for. And his solution is to get Raph to write down his plan for Fillory and then hanging it up for all to see. In response, Elliot, who finds campaigning boring, summons Josh to create posters to state that every Fillorian will get 10 sacks of grain a year. And Margot questions that, saying how can they even promise that, as even with magic, that's not feasible. But Elliot doesn't care, because the first rule of politics is that all you have to do is just say it. It doesn't have to actually be true. And so Elliot's entire plan is to counter all of Tick's policies with larger promises. Tick then counters the counter by releasing the transcript from their Wombat trial, where Elliot calls Fillory a malorient shithole. Julia is really starting to go God mode. She's hearing prayers from a family of a little boy who has a fever when Katie and Penny 23 interrupt her, saying they need to find Reynard. Katie is like, Julia, you have all the power now. But Julia is like, yeah, but he's still a trickster. And then Penny 23 is like, all you have to do is to locate him and then power up the Traveler Sigils and we can go find him by ourselves. But Julia is like, I already know where he is and I'm not letting you guys go there alone. And ends up taking them all there. They arrive in front of a nice looking house and Katie expresses annoyance at the fact that he isn't in something like a Russian prison. That is, until a pizza delivery man shows up and nope, the delivery man is Reynard. Reynard claims that living among the humans has changed him, but Julia's like, I know you're lying, and he drops the act and asks them why they've tracked him down. They ask him about the castle at the end of the world, and he's like, you're not really thinking about going there, are you? There's a reason the architect put it at the end of the world. He then goes on to mock Julia for her godhood, but she's like, your tiny spark has grown bigger in me than it ever could have in you. And then Reynard is like, fine, you want the truth? The castle at the end of the world is where the gods put the stuff they made before you. The stuff that didn't work out. The mistakes that never should have happened. He then tries to shoot Julia with the god-killing bullets. And they're like, whoa, where did you get that from? And he's like, I got it from my stepfather Hades, just in case of an emergency for himself, as gods, even ones without magic, are still hard to kill. Julia, who has successfully stopped Reynard, smiles and is like, what are the odds that you think this god-killing bullet will work on that monster? So they go to leave with the gun, and Penny 23 is like, wait, you're not gonna try to shoot him or something? Katie and Julia are just like, well, it seems like he's suffering plenty. We don't need to do anything. Raph brings news of the election. Elliot lost, and so did Tick. The winner of the election and the new High King is Margot. She won as a write-in. She was the only human to engage with the talking animals, and after her good conversation with Frey's bear boyfriend, who is a respected member of the community, she got their vote. Her acceptance of marriage between beasts and humans was exactly what they care about right now, as they've been trying to become equal with humans. Also, there's only about 50,000 humans in Fillory, while there is upwards of 1 million talking animals. It turns out that there's never been a census or an election before, so nobody really knew how little the human vote mattered. Margot tries to apologize to Elliot for stealing the election, but he isn't mad at her and ends up being the first to kneel down and congratulate her on her kingship. Margot is officially crowned, and Elliot goes to Tick to tell him that they aren't going to execute him. Instead, they want to offer him a position in Margot's cabinet due to his expertise. The only caveat being that he will have to have a 24-hour security detail. Margot's first act as king is to give fairies citizenship and full protection under the law, as well as a seat in government. And once this is all processed, the queen agrees to give them the key as soon as the last fairy has moved into their new home. She tells Margot that she saw something in her, even when Margot couldn't see it herself. And she ends up touching Margot's face and gives her a fairy eye. The new eye gives her a different field of vision, fairy vision. The queen leaves, and Fen is like, "Hey, wait! What about some toes for me?" But she's already gone. Katie stores away the god-killing gun and picks up the Unity key, which is once again working. Josh asks if they have to sing again, but Katie hears Penny and starts to tell him that she loves him and that she's going to try everything to get him back from the underworld. He interrupts her and says, "Sorry, it's actually Penny 23. The quest is now on chapter 8, the final chapter, and Julia is excited, but Quentin isn't. He's dealing with the fact that he's sacrificed everything that the quest has wanted him to, but he still doesn't feel sure that he's doing the right thing. He thought it would change him, but he still feels the same. He's worried about his dad, and given that the cancer was magic-based, it's not a given that Julia can help him after magic gets turned back on. And it just leaves Quentin feeling like the quest wants to make him cold and be able to sacrifice anyone and everything. But Julia's like, well, if that's the case, then the quest messed up by picking Quentin Coldwater. He ends up going to his dad and tells him about magic and how he's on a quest and that it's just been leading him into a corner where it seems like no matter what he does, someone's going to end up hurt. His dad guesses that magic is gone. While not being a magician himself, he could feel it when it was gone, and when he went into remission a week later, it confirmed it. He asks Quentin if he's here for his permission to turn it back on, but Quentin chooses to tell him about his time on the quest, how he experienced growing old and having a family. He's not here to ask for permission. He wanted to look his dad in the eye and tell him that he's sorry. He doesn't know what's gonna happen, but he has to do this. His dad asks him what he named his son, and a tearful Quentin tells him he named him after him. Episode 13. Will you play with me? Chapter 8. The knight remains imprisoned at the end of the world by the witch, unable to escape. His daughter, a knight in her own right, never gave up, fighting monsters both internal and external in order to get all of the keys, and is now setting sail for the castle at the end of the world. At the castle, there are 7 faces that swallow the keys, and then a door opens. She finds her father chained with 7 locks and uses the keys to unlock him. Elliot interrupts the story and is like, wait, weren't the keys swallowed by the door? And Josh is like, it could be a paradox, a clue. Whereas Katie is just like, we're so fucked. The library is ready to swoop in with the siphon, and it's on them to beat them to the end of the world before they can find another source for the siphon. Julia starts hearing more and more prayers and has been dubbed the Lady of the Trees. She steps away from the group, and Iris, a messenger goddess, greets her, telling her that congrats! You completed the Lady Underground's task. You grew that spark, and now you're a full-on fledgling goddess. And they have to go now. Julia wants to stay and complete the quest, but Iris tells her that she's beyond that. She doesn't need to carry that around anymore, be it the quest or her pain. Julia goes to Quentin and tells him about her godhood, and he earnestly tells her that he's proud of her, and they say their goodbyes to each other. And Julia ends up leaving him just enough magic to do a spell. Josh is looking into castles and the witch and makes some headway based off of the illustration in the book. It shows the witch having some drafting tools that architects use. The witch might actually be the architect that made the prison for the gods' mistakes. They need to find her. Julia leaves, but not before Margot raises a heavy brow. The group tries to recall any gods that have anything to do with architecture, but Alice is like, don't forget about Calypso. You know, the witch who imprisoned Odysseus? She was a nymph, not a god, who was able to trap Odysseus for several years on an island. They try to look up the island, but find it's not a real place, but there are a bunch of things named for it. One of which happens to be a tech company that creates the mobile game that Josh loves, Candy Colliders. And the CEO is a woman named Callie. They end up going to talk to her, and she agrees to hear them, as she promised Prometheus she would. But she's not a fan of the quest for magic, as it's the reason that Prometheus died. The castle, though, it was the greatest commission of her career. And in order for the prison to remain secure, it needed top-notch jailers. The knight and his daughter made a sacrifice to protect the world. Hasn't the quest already taught them the importance of a sacrifice? Prometheus created a back door for the prison, as well as a quest that only the qualified would find, as they need to keep the prison secure. He used all his magic to create the keys, as he saw a time when they would be needed, and he believed so strongly in those that would come that he weakened himself before his enemies. Quentin hands her the first key and tells her he's sorry that they took so long. Josh asks her where it is, and also how to get in, which she's been waiting since the days the keys were made to tell them. The castle is in Fillory. The legend goes that the dwarves who made Whitespire were inspired by the most beautiful design they had ever seen, Blackspire. But then Ember came in and flipped it, and while it didn't get destroyed, it's just underneath now. She goes to send them off, and they're like, whoa, 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 what about the key paradox? But she just sends them off, saying that she did everything she did to the daughter in order to prepare her for what's locked inside. They'll find a way. She gives them a final warning that what is locked inside can never be allowed to escape. Fen is acting High King and is working on the latest tax report when the Fairy Queen comes in and says 6 fairies have gone missing, and she's found a device of those she believes responsible, a pair of night vision goggles. Julius and Iris end up in a god lab, and Julia gets a crash course in godhood. A majority of the time is going to be spent in the lab creating a new world, and then the remaining is answering prayers a few times a week in order to keep morale up. Julia is still connected to her friends, and Iris lets her know that those connections will fade with time. But in the meantime, Julia needs to work on her discipline to keep from being seduced by their needs for the little things. Why worry about saving one fairy when she could create a world where no fairy ever has to suffer? Penny 23 offers to travel inside Blackspire to figure out the situation, but Margot rejects him, saying that they already have too much Penny blood on their hands, and they don't even know if the knight inside is going to be able to help them. Quentin, on the other hand, uses the little bit of magic that Julia gave him in order to incept himself into the castle and meets with the knight's daughter, Aura. She knows why he's there, but she can't help. There's only one thing that she's left guarding, since he killed all the others. He's too powerful, and she can't do anything that would risk the security of her charge. But Quentin makes her an offer that she can't refuse and ends up going back to the others to let them know what's going on, saying that it was a good use of the magic given that Aura is there of her free will and she was bound to know how to get in and out, and now she's willing to open a way for them. All they have to do now is get in there, put the keys in, and then get out fast. Aura will take care of the monster, and the price for her cooperation? Well, Quentin has agreed to become the new jailer. The monster is no laughing matter. The only way to guarantee that it stays inside is a sacrifice. No one likes the idea, but Quentin is resolute. Fen disguises herself as a fairy to find out who is taking the fairies, and well, wouldn't you know it, it's Irene in the library. Fen ends up having the guards take them back to Whitespire, where she lets the queen know what's going on. The group wants the fairy queen to keep them captive until they can turn magic back on so that they aren't able to use the siphon, but the fairy queen is unwilling, saying that she has to deal with this now. She ends up offering herself, a queen with the power of 50 fairies, in exchange for fairies not being hunted by non-fairies. A deal that can never be broken for any reason by any being. And the library accepts. Alice exchanges a favor with Dean Fogg for an experimental spell that will take away her memories and create a new persona. She is afraid she will be too tempted by magic once it gets turned back on. He gives her the spell and a potion to reboot herself. She then leaves, and then we can overhear Dean Fogg making arrangements with Zelda. Back on the Flying Taco Tuesday, the gang gets ready for Blackspire. Alice tells Quentin that she loves him and that she's sad that she's going to forget. The fairy queen prepares to become fairy dust and ends up calling Irene a power-hungry little girl, which leads to Irene stabbing her and taking her deal. The gang minus Julia make it under Fillory and arrive at a Blackspire that still has a little magic. Aura greets them and lets them in, and Alice sneaks away. Aura gives Quentin the 411. She has only been able to survive this long because she serves a purpose: to love the monster like one would a child. The monster thinks they're playing a game right now. It's the only way that she could sneak them in, but he's going to get bored sooner than later. Elliot hands the keys to Margot just in case he gets held up. Aura and Quentin go down to the monster, a creature that the gods created that wants endlessly. It needs security and constant love. Without it, its appetite goes unfed and unleashed. Not even the gods can stop it. While they're doing this, Elliot and Alice have both snuck up on them. A man, the monster, comes out and asks Quentin if he will play with him. Quentin accepts and brings his cards out, but just then Elliot comes bursting out with the god-killing gun and shoots. The monster drops, but some magic dust goes up in the air. They go back to the keyhole place, and Alice comes back and uses magic to destroy the keys, claiming there is no good side to magic, it just makes people bad. She can't handle it, so she decided no one gets it. Iris and Julia are working on making her first world, but she is getting distracted by her friends. Quentin is on the floor trying to not give up, while in her ear Iris is telling her that she needs to give them up. Because in the blink of an eye, it won't matter. It will always get better. they need to focus on the bigger picture. Alice has run away again and comes across Aura, who now has glowing eyes and is inhabited by the monster. Elliot and Margot come after her and drag her back, and she tries to tell them about the monster situation, but they aren't listening to her, just telling her to fix this, as a morose Quentin is like, we can't, magic's gone. Julia pops in and is like, damn guys, your pain is really loud, and criticizes Alice for unilaterally deciding that no one should have magic, saying that it isn't what's best for everyone, and tells her to stay out of the way for now. Julia tells them that it was Quentin's bravery that made her see what she has to do. She does what Prometheus did. She uses her power to create the keys. And after the last key is formed, she is a god no more, and they put the keys into the locks. Nothing happens for a long second until suddenly the fountain turns on and magic rushes forward. But before we can celebrate, Dean Fogg, Irene, and the library come in with their handy-dandy siphon and stick it on, and magic is now drained to the library. Irene tries to kill them, but Dean Fogg reminds her that they have a deal. She needs to stop unless she wants to have a problem with the library. Dean Fogg then uses the potion that he prepared for Alice on everybody. At break bills, they are back to teaching magic with magic, but there are some power issues. The rations are crap. Dean Fogg has to go to the library about getting more rations. He gets there and starts the bureaucratic process for more allocation. He also goes to see Alice, who is being held by the library. Since she broke the deal with the library, they are now keeping her. She's also the only one who didn't lose their memory. She frantically asks Dean Fogg where they are, and he's like, don't worry, they're safe from the McAllisters. But she's not concerned about them. She's worried about the monster. It's still out there and it can jump bodies. If they don't know who they are and can't use magic, they can't protect themselves. And why would it go after them? Well, it's seen them and it knows they're magicians. We end up seeing Margot, who is now going by Janet, getting picked up by Josh, who is now known as Isaac. Julia is an architect, Penny is a DJ, Katie is a drug dealer, and Quentin, well, he's the eternal nerd. And Elliot shows up and is like, I found you, Quentin, but Quentin is like, no, sorry, my name is Brian. Elliot just asks him to do the card trick, and then asks if he'll play with him. Quentin walks away, but Elliot continues to follow him as the song One Way or Another, I'm Gonna Get You plays. Alice pleads with Dean Fogg to get her out of there and to help her stop it, while Elliot tells Quentin not to be scared as there's so much for them to do and so many people that deserve their wrath. Because anything you do is more fun with a friend. A cliffhanger. Once again, we find ourselves in this oh so familiar place. Oh well. If anybody's interested in a season 4, you know what to do. Like, comment, and subscribe. That's it for now. Bye.